The following program is a past pre recorded broadcast of the Bear Psychology Radio Show and is not accepting emails or telephone calls. Please do not write or call in. Thank you for your continued listenership to Reality Radio 101, where we are connecting the world. The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. And now, right to your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, I'm Dr. Anna Baranowski, and I'm so glad to be with you here again today. Again, as usually, we are on Bear Psychology Radio, bearing witness to evolving mind, mood, health. And I'm really happy to join you. If you have questions or comments or concerns or thoughts that are of an interest, please do email them to instudio101@gmail.com. This is a pre-recorded radio show, so I will get those emails and we can address them at our next show. I want you to remember that I have found the most profound changes occur when a person truly feels heard and understood. I like to think of it as deeply bearing witness to life evolving. We can feel incredibly stuck when we live with our fears, our stressors, and troubles alone. But when we share and we dialogue and we feel supported, it provides a powerful foundation for us to move forward in understanding and care. Isn't it time for your evolution? I am very lucky to be speaking today with Kristi Hugstad. She comes with an incredible story of her own and has been very generative in her writing, and her own life has really fed into her wisdom. Right now, she's working as a Pilates instructor at her own studio, so she's an entrepreneur, but she's the author of 3 current books that are published, and she's got 3 more that are coming. And each one of these books lays an incredible foundation, a wealth of information and wisdom that has come through her own life experiences. From her senior publicist, Kim Corbin, writes, even before the coronavirus hit, today's teens and adults were already facing intense mental health challenges like academic stress, substance abuse, eating disorders, financial insecurity, anxiety, and depression, just to name a few. And when you add the tough pandemic realities like virtual learning, social distance from family and friends, the loss of employment opportunities, it's no wonder that many people are feeling isolated, afraid, and more stressed than ever before. I think that Kristi's book does an amazing job at giving us little snippets of information and wisdom about what we can do that's super simple and practical. So I have a copy of her book, Be You Only Better, Real Life Self-Care. And it's really, it says it's targeted for young adults and everyone else. But really, as I read through the book, it seemed pretty applicable to most people who are struggling today with just really simple, practical advice. And the one thing that I really love about this book is it's got such practical strategies that help with activation, like just get you engaged in your life, doing things that are meaningful, that can empower you to move out of your struggle and back into meaningful life. Now, I have found that most people who are struggling in their lives often have their own stories lead to incredible growth and change. And Christy's story is exactly like that. Now, I know, Kristi, you and I have had a conversation, and I do know that you've faced some terrible trauma of your own, and you have used it to help you grow and propel forward, recognizing what your own mission is on this planet. And I wonder if you would be willing to share with our listeners today a bit about your own story and how that has shaped you to become this incredible writer and entrepreneur.
Well, 8 years ago, my husband Bill completed suicide by running in front of a train near our home. And to make the everything a little bit more traumatic, his father was a passenger on that train. I was completely blindsided, and I went through such trauma, and I tried so many different things to try to help him. And there was a point where I thought, you have two choices here. You can be a victim of your circumstances, or you can use your pain to make a difference in your life and in other people's lives. So that's what inspired me to start writing. I started out journaling just to get my thoughts and trauma and negativity out and down on paper. And then that journal became my first book. From there, I thought, I need to do what I can for suicide education and prevention, because my husband was 54 years old and he was in the group white middle-aged man, the highest risk for suicide, right? And if I'm going to make a difference, and if we're going to make a dent in the epidemic of teen suicide, we've got to start educating our youth. They need to grow up in an environment where they have tools for self-care, where they feel free to get help when they are experiencing mental health issues. We need to get rid of the stigma, and that starts with our young people. So that's why I wrote Beneath the Surface, a teen's guide to reaching out when you or a friend are in crisis. Goes over all the different issues that our young people are facing today, from cyberbullying, which is a main cause of teen suicide, self-harm, eating disorders, substance abuse, peer pressure, academic pressure, parental pressure, anxiety, depression, suicide. So every chapter covers an issue that our teens are dealing with, and then gives you a real life story of somebody that is in my area that actually had that issue and how they worked through it. And then, of course, I also include where to go and resources for help.
Kristi, first of all, I'm so sorry to hear about your story. It sounds like it was a devastation. You said that you were trying to help your husband, but nothing was really working. Is that what you said?
Well, he had depression for at least a year before he died. And I will admit that in my head, we owned a large gym in Dana Point where we lived. In my head, I wanted to fix him. I wanted my old husband back. And so I made appointments with psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, church counselors, And I took him to all these different appointments. He was put on all different kinds of meds. So I was in this frenzy trying to get my husband back. And now in hindsight, all the warning signs and risk factors were there, all of them. And I didn't know how serious the situation was. It's not that I ignored them. I mean, I was scared enough to at one point take him to the ER, and they admitted him. And then 24 hours later, they released him and he got no help. So I knew deep down that this was serious, but I never thought in a million years that he would actually take his own life. To me, that was something that happened to other people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it just seems like it would be an impossibility to imagine that somebody you're close with and love so much could be so horribly desperate. But I noticed that you talk about, like you talk about your husband. He's 54 years old. He's in such a terrible state, and he makes this horrific choice. And then you immediately go to teens and youth. And I'm just wondering, were you aware of your husband having had struggles from his youth that you think led to his eventual suicide at age 54?
That's a really good question, because I don't know that much about his upbringing. He was an only child. He was very entitled. He was a great athlete, the baseball pitcher, football quarterback, basketball star. He was a bodybuilder. He had a lot of admirers. So he was kind of a spoiled, entitled child. I do think now, looking back, that genetics played a part of it. I think his dad had depression. He was taking benzos to sleep for insomnia.
Your husband or his father?
My husband.
Uh-huh.
And he ran out, and I think that was a big factor. So I think it was a combination of things. We had sold our business. I think he felt like he didn't have a purpose or identity anymore. So I think it was the perfect storm. I think all these things were happening at once.
Mm-hmm.
And then he also felt like he was a burden to me. He kept saying, Kristi, I don't know how you put up with me. And you'd be better off without me. Here again, warning sign after warning sign. And he was in a place where he really thought that all of us, including his parents, would be better off without him.
Right. What a terrible thing. Sometimes, and I think this is true for most people in life. Sometimes we go through these periods where we kind of have to do a reckoning of, who we are, like life is changing, we reach a new milestone in life. And, you get into your 50s, it's a kind of a new stage in life, and you have to start really contemplating, where are you now and what's your next step and what's most important to you now. And sometimes people get lost in that step. Anyways, I think people have a tendency of really struggling when they arrive at new milestones. Like, here I am, like I'm 20 and I'm finished school and I don't know what I'm doing. And it's like, I don't know what the next step is. And I didn't figure out if I wanted to have a career in this, that, or the other thing. It's like, what am I up to now? But it's interesting because your husband dies, but your first book is about teens and adolescence. And I wonder how you kind of navigated that, because it just seems like it's interesting. I know you're a supporter of suicide prevention and you want to give people the steps, but I wonder how come you went back to teens and adolescents rather than that really at-risk group.
Well, actually, my first book was my story.
Yeah.
And it starts with how we had a successful gym together. We had a beautiful home overlooking the ocean. We seemed to have that perfect life from the outside. And what people don't realize is all the trauma going on behind closed doors. Bill did not want anybody in our small town knowing that he was suffering from depression or suicidal ideation. So we were living kind of a secretive life. So, we gave the appearance of the perfect couple when the reality was much different and much darker. So my first book, I shared my story. And I want to let the reader know people aren't always how they seem. If somebody tells you, yeah, I'm okay, what you need to dig deeper, because people buy into the stigma of mental illness and they're not really that eager to share.
So it seems to me, Kristi, that, I mean, because what you're saying is so important for our listeners, this idea of silence and the shame and the desire for nobody to know that you're suffering. And I mean, life is messy, it's complicated, we go through struggles. There are times when we're not doing as well as we might like to, we're confused. This is a perfect time to look at that, silence as well, and shame, because people are sitting at home during COVID going like, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know how to spend my time, I feel really low, I don't want to engage in anything, I don't want anybody to see me. And yet having a voice and being able to say it's hard. One of the things that we do, one of my organizations, I run a charity, and in the charity, it's called Trauma Practice for Healthy Communities. And one of the things that we did was we pivoted to an online secure platform to bring people together and reduce the stigma and the isolation, so that, people could talk and feel like they're being understood and heard. And one of the groups that we're running is called Lean In. And the Lean In is really about communicating with people in an honest way. And we're using an ECBR model, which really addresses that kind of like, I'm going to show up and just hear what you have to say without judging you or, giving you feedback on, what I think you should do or anything like that. Right. But it sounds like your husband was suffering so much. How long did that go on for? Like, when did you first realize?
It started when we sold our business and we moved down to Rosarito, Mexico. We had a condo and a vacation home down there. So what was happening is we sold our business. He no longer had a purpose. He didn't have clients that he was personally training or the adulation of a business owner. He now was in a foreign country where nobody knew him, and he felt like he didn't have any identity anymore. And even as a young kid, being a great athlete, he always had kind of a fan base. And so being in his early 50s and not having purpose, I think was the start of it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it came on gradually.
Right.
And then he started to not sleep and he couldn't get out of bed. So then we moved back to Southern California because I thought it was Mexico. It was our location. And if we got back to our familiar surroundings, I would get my husband back. So we moved back, which nothing improved, but at least now I thought I had resources to get him help. But one thing looking back now that I realized, he did buy into the stigma. I was the one that had to take him to the appointments, sit with him. He was prescribed all different kinds of meds. But I also bought into the stigma because I'm trying to fix him because I want our old lives back and I want my husband back the way he used to be. So it never occurred to me during that year that it was going to end the way it did. I always thought he would find that right doctor, that right pill, that right psychiatrist, and he would be okay.
Yeah. And it sounds like not having the normal activities of his life, not having all that reinforcement from a community who loved what he did. It just was a shock to his system. That's actually a really important thing, because remember I had said, developmentally we arrive at new places and sometimes it takes us a while to get to that comfort level with where we're at. Was it his idea to sell the business? Did he think that it was time for him to have a change?
I actually knew it was 2008, and I knew that the economy was starting to turn around. A lot of our members of our gym were selling their boats and giving up their slips, downsizing, moving inland. So I felt the turn coming in the economy. And so we discussed it. And my feeling was we need to sell this gym now while it's worth something, because the economy is starting to turn and we're going to be in trouble in a few years. So, we did well. We sold it, and then we decided to go, out of the country. And I looked at it as an adventure. And now looking back, it was the start of his demise.
Yeah. He was just totally okay before then.
Yes, he was.
Wow. So you didn't see any cracks in his kind of inner life or moments where he would feel insecure or any of that?
No, I didn't at that time. It all started to surface once we actually moved out of the country.
Right.
And then the isolation and everything started to surface.
Now, you did something remarkable. You journaled about it. You wrote about it. You leaned into all of this. Kristi, you are incredibly brave. How did you find the courage to do that?
Well, as I started to journal and put my story down on paper, I realized that people that read my first book were reaching out to me and say, hey, my brother died by suicide. My father shot himself. So there's a big community. And as a matter of fact, in this day and age, almost everybody has a connection to somebody with a mental illness. So I realized that I was opening the door to start these conversations and to normalize mental health issues so that people can get help. But my main intent initially was, here's my story. And now the second half of the book is, here are some tools to help you in your grief journey. And here are specific examples of what I did. So if I'm talking about, you need to get adequate sleep, I would give an example. This is what my room looks like. This is what I do. I now sleep on his side of the bed. Just simple things that people may not think of. If your husband dies and you have that empty space next to you every evening, that might not be healthy for you. So I wanted to give specific examples of what I did to help me move forward in my grief journey. So it did start out with tools for grief and my story.
Okay. And, again, I don't want to miss this piece, but, there's an issue here around where you found your courage to stay with this and really allow yourself to do the writing. I would love to hear how you did that.
I didn't want to continue to be a victim of the trauma I had experienced. So I just made a conscious decision that I was going to use my story to help other people. And to me, that's the only choice I had, right? Mm-hmm. I can't lay in bed and feel sorry for myself. Everybody has traumatic experiences in life. Mm-hmm. And you have a choice as to what you do with that. And then I thought the best way to do that and reach as many people as possible is to share my story and give them tools, examples of what I did, not just telling you, hey, make sure you get exercise, get lots of sleep, eat right. Those are pretty basic. Everybody knows that they should be doing those things, but specifically get specific, because I'm black and white, right? I mean, there's no middle ground. So do this, don't do this. And here's my story. So I think everybody has that choice in life, what they're going to do with their pain and their grief. And I just really wanted people to know I've been in a really dark place, and give people that hope and inspiration that they too can come out on the other side and live a happy life.
Right. Now, I want to go into this terrific book, Be You Only Better. And I want to start with this 5 types of self-care, which you identify as being really important and part of this. You identify as something physical, something emotional, something social, something mental, and something financial. And I know you go into a lot of detail in each of these, but how did you come up with these 5?
Well, in all the reading and research that I was doing prior to writing the book, for young adults, I didn't see much about finances, but I remember as a young adult, that's the time when I discovered credit cards. And I was very irresponsible and charged everything. And to me, it was free money. So I don't think most people associate financial care
Okay, literacy.
as a self-care tool.
Yeah.
But your whole being, your physical, exercising and eating properly, emotional self-care, socializing, having friends and family, and then your mental brain power, as well as financial, all have to work together to make you a happy, well-adjusted person.
Nice. Yeah. I know it's a nice addition, that literacy piece, and one that really empowers a young person to feel like they can take care of themselves. You have a chapter called Write It Down, and you talk about how important writing down your own experience can be. And you give this story about Sophia being 16 years old, and she loses her parents lose custody of 5 children. Everyone moves in with the grandparents. It's a difficult life. She's working at a local 7-Eleven as a cashier, and she's taking classes at a community college, and she's just kind of really grappling with a whole lot of demand in her life. And she starts to do some writing. She takes an English composition class, and she starts recognizing that there's something about writing, about grappling with her thoughts and her feelings through words without judgment. I wonder, when did you start to recognize the power of what you called free writing? Where did that come into your life?
I went to a psychologist after Bill's death because I needed help working through my feelings and my emotions and my anger. I was angry at Bill, at his parent, whoever I could direct my anger at. I was in that negative mind space. And one of the psychologists that I visited told me to start journaling, write it down. And I've heard that a million times. And of course I thought, well, I can handle this on my own. I don't need to write things down. And I thought, well, you know what? It can't hurt. And here's what was really interesting. After the first couple months, the thing that really hit home is when I would go back to the beginning of my journal, when I first started, to where I was 6 months later. What was interesting is that I now realized just how far I'd come, how far forward I'd been moving in my grief journey. And that was validated by my journaling. So not only did I get out all my negative thoughts and emotions, and I had somewhere to direct that anger, but I also was able to chart my progress in my grief journey. And that made me feel like I was actually being proactive and getting somewhere.
Amazing. So you could see for yourself that there was something about that outlet that was changing you over time. You weren't getting stuck. Like the beginning didn't just continue repeating itself, as it does sometimes. We can get stuck at stages in our life, especially if something horribly traumatic has happened. But in your case, there was something about the habit of journaling that changed things for you. Now, I like that in your book, you've got a whole chapter on building the journaling habit. Can you say a little bit about that? You know, how you started it, what it takes to commit to that? Because I think what you said is quite true. It's actually really, really hard to kind of, you know, you hear it like people say, yeah, write your thoughts, write your feelings, open a journal, make it happen. But it's like, yeah, okay, I'm not going to do that. How did you kind of get from, I'm not doing that thing, to I'm doing it, and not only that, I'm doing it regularly?
I was a little afraid, to be honest, to start writing down my feelings because that made what had happened in my trauma very real. And that was my big hesitation, is if I write it down and I read it, this really happened. That's my new reality. I kept it simple. I just used a notebook that was on my desk. So you don't have to get a fancy journal. You can just write on a piece of paper. You can write on a back of an envelope. You can go online. You can use your phone, whatever works for you. Don't overthink it. Just start writing. And I did it at the same time every day. I would do it right after dinner when, you know, my day was pretty much over and I could clear my head and actually think clearly about what I was thinking and feeling. So I think it's important to find a certain time of the day that works for you, and don't put so much pressure on yourself. I didn't journal every day, probably 3 days a week. And it was extra, it was the icing on the cake if I did 4 or 5. But don't put the pressure on yourself. I have to journal at 6 p.m. every day, because that's not the purpose of journaling. Journaling is there to help you and guide you, and you don't want to make it a chore.
Good point. Yeah. And here you also reference in your book a couple of really interesting studies, the UCLA study that researched the effects of on the brain of people who saw a photo of an angry or a fearful face, and just seeing that fearful face increased activity in the amygdala, and the amygdala is the emotional control center in the brain. However, when these same people started to write out what they saw, their feelings, the emotion, the strong emotion started to decrease. And this is really interesting because it really speaks to what might happen when we're emotionally, when we're really suffering. You know, we need this outlet, this non-judgmental outlet. You were afraid that writing out the story was going to make it real for you, but it sounds like what happened was it allowed you to integrate and process. And yes, it was real. I mean, I hear how you speak about it today. You seem to have come to terms with an integrated, yeah, this is the truth. This is what has happened in your life. And it's hard to be at peace in our life if we can't accept, you know, what has happened, you know, to be honest about our truth. So this is really beautiful. Another one that you added in your book was why journaling is beneficial to mental health. And you referenced another research study going with the University of Rochester Medical Center, that journaling helps manage anxiety and cope with depression. And that just by writing down feelings and concerns, you're going to be able to track symptoms and learn ways to find solutions. Just the act of identifying negative or destructive thoughts and feelings can help you manage them. So you can also track your symptoms and recognize your triggers. And this gives you more clarity and increases potential responses, gives you an opportunity to address that in real time. Like, I always think it's really interesting because if you're able to write it down and have that honest relationship with yourself, it certainly makes it easier to come clean with the people in your life around you and be able to say, yeah, you know, I'm struggling with this thing. You know, I find myself, you know, thinking about it, and I'm not doing so well. Like, as you were writing about what was happening with the aftermath of your husband's suicide, were there people in your life who you were sharing your experiences with other than the psychologist? Were there people in your personal life?
Absolutely. My family was a huge source of support, especially one of my sisters. But what's interesting, and I know your listeners can probably relate to this, whatever trauma that you're experiencing, if you've lost a loved one or whatever that might be, people are there for you initially. But there's a point in time where everybody goes back to their own life. And you, as the person that's experienced the trauma, are shocked at that because you still need their support. So that was a little unexpected because for the first few nights, I had my sisters and my mom stayed with me for the first couple nights. So I wasn't alone. And that stopped after 4 days. And I remember thinking, how can I stay here by myself? Well, what are they thinking? They left me alone. But it's it's natural human behavior to be there in the moment of crises. But just know that there's a point when you're going through trauma that you've got to reach out and let people know you still need help. You still need to talk. Most people, more distant friends and people in my business, they didn't want to bring Bill up because they thought by speaking his name, it would remind me of the fact that he died. Mm-hmm. I didn't forget that Bill died. As a matter of fact, I wanted to talk to the people that knew him. I wanted to hear his name. I wanted to hear stories about how he impacted their lives. So don't feel like, oh, we can't talk about it, I'm going to distract her, because that's exactly the opposite of what I needed at that time.
That was your experience, that your feeling was like, more than anything, you wanted to have people around who you could share with, who remembered, what he brought to their lives, and that he was a real person who was really important and impactful. And there's no reason to let that part go. It's actually true that some people really prefer having that active communication, but other people really actually are terrified of having that communication because they don't necessarily do what you did, which was figure out ways to really integrate and come to terms with the story. And the fact that you were able to integrate and come to terms with the story, that you were actively engaging in a process to narrate what happened, made it possible for you to move forward. That to me seems like a very, very powerful part of your message and your story, Kristi.
Well, also, I realized that most people do stigmatize suicide. They're not comfortable. At Bill's memorial, I wanted it to be a celebration of his life. And people avoided me. They didn't know what to say. It was awkward. And I remember thinking, I need to reach out to them to make them feel comfortable being here, because it was so awkward. And I remember thinking, if Bill had died of heart disease, this would be completely different. People would be running up to me and giving me a hug and telling me how sorry they were. And what I found, and I still find to this day, is people buy into the stigma. They don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. So they say and do nothing. And people actually go out of their way, even to this day, to avoid me.
Did you lose friends as a result of this?
Yes. People that had been in our gym for 20 years, that I'd been there when their kids were going through elementary school, junior high, senior high. I knew their families. I knew more about them than anybody. They pretty much dropped out of sight. And there was just a handful of friends that actually were there for me. And I don't fault them for that. They didn't know what to do or say. But my message to your listeners is the worst thing you can do or say is to do or say nothing. Mm-hmm. That was the most hurtful. There's no right or wrong thing to say. Just acknowledge me, acknowledge my loss. I don't care how you do it. You don't have to say anything. Just give me a big hug. Let me know that you care. But please acknowledge the person that is grieving and in pain.
I think you're right when you say, people don't want to reach out because they themselves are afraid. I think that there is something really true to that. We will avoid the devastation just looking in the eyes of somebody who's experienced a great loss or has suffered in a very, very deep way can connect you with a kind of a sadness that a lot of people have difficulty leaving space for. I mean, it's part of the whole, this is part of what happened to Bill. He couldn't stand the pain he was suffering. He didn't want anybody to know the pain he was suffering. So I think it's beautiful that you are speaking this truth and raising this and saying, talk to me. This is human. This happens. This is not strange. This speaks to the pain and suffering in this world. Look, Kristi, I'm saying hi to you, and I'm so glad that we're having this chance to talk, because this is such a huge, huge story. And your understanding of how it has unfolded for you actually is probably going to be very, very helpful for people to hear, because I don't think you're alone at all. I think there are a lot of people, parents and siblings and cousins and friends and psychologists, therapists and professionals and, all sorts of people who have lost somebody to suicide. And it's like there's a huge stigma around it. People don't want to admit.
Well, that's why I have to be free with sharing my story, because what happens is everybody else comes out of the woodwork, but somebody has to start the conversation. Yeah. And that's why I thought, let's back it up a little bit and let's start these conversations at 13 and 14 years old and let them know that your mental health is just as important as your physical health. Right? If you broke your leg, you wouldn't crawl into bed for a week and hope it heals itself. You go to a professional and you get treatment. So, what I went through, the stigma was so severe. I bought into it. My husband, our friends, the community, people are scared of mental illness. They're not comfortable and they'd rather avoid it. But now, especially, during this pandemic, the suicides and the teen suicides are epidemic. And we've got to start talking about it and getting rid of that stigma so people that need help feel free to reach out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There is something really important about people just having normal conversations with each other where we recognize that it's not that unusual to feel sad, and that, there are ways for us to navigate that and to leave some space with that, to learn about our emotions, to be friendlier towards our own emotions, and to find ways to leave space for them, because, our emotions are actually part of our wisdom system. And it's actually an opportunity for us to better understand what our next step is, because we're not paying attention to that. It's going to be hard for us to actually move forward. Like, you embraced the pain that you were feeling. You gave it space. You let yourself work through it. That was very restorative for you, very healing by the sounds of it. And it's really sad, because what I'm hearing you say is Bill didn't have that opportunity. He didn't allow for that kind of space in his life. And, because in my practice, I actually have more men than females. It's a bit of an unusual practice. And I do a lot of work with first responders and, people who are, working in careers where, the demands are, physical, and, people are working in very heavy duty careers. So what I find is, there's a high expectation for excellence in a certain area and a low tolerance for emotion. So there's a kind of a lack of willingness to leave space for emotion. And a lot, you had said it well, your husband was one of these guys. He's 54 and he's a white guy, and he's in the highest category for suicide risk. And those are the stats. That's accurate. And, you know, part of what I have found with that population is that there is a high personal demand for a certain level of achievement and a very low tolerance for emotion. And I think it's wonderful that you're bringing that message to a young population. It's like, look, you know, talk about your feelings, recognize what they are, you know, and leave space for them, because that's part of our growth as human beings. It doesn't matter if you're a firefighter or, you know, you're a ballet student. It's like you learn to leave space for that. You learn to develop a relationship, a friendly relationship with your emotion. Now I'm going to move into something very practical, which is your sleep. So after you've experienced something really hard, sleep can be hard to access. Sleep can be hard to reclaim and retrain. So can you talk a little bit about the things that you recommend for getting back to sleep?
Well, first of all, you have to make your room an oasis for sleep. Make it dark, make it cozy, make it comfortable. I have an app, a calm app that I play to relax me and actually help me to fall asleep. I don't drink coffee past noon. You know, a lot of young adults have energy drinks in the afternoon, full of sugar or Cokes or whatever, and then have that sugar crash. So get off the caffeine. The problem too with young adults is their iPhones. They are on them 24/7. A lot of the teens that I work with take them to bed. So you've got to put your phone down, unplug from social media a couple hours before you go to bed, and let your body and your mind relax. So you have to create a sleep routine. Try to go to bed and wake up the same time every day, and even on the weekends. You know, I mean, I remember as a teenager, I'd sleep till noon on Saturdays and Sundays. And I had a real hard time getting up at 6:30 to go to school. You know, it was always a struggle. So figure out what works for you. Deep breathing, an app, anything you can do to help your mind and body relax, and just make it a routine every night.
Good advice, and it's something that you work towards, because I think a lot of people, especially if there's really, you know, a significant trauma, people can struggle with, you know, waking up in the middle of the night, you know, facing intrusive thoughts and memories, you know, struggling with terrible nightmares, and, you know, all of those things can happen as well. So, you know, just for the listeners out there, what I'm hearing Kristi talk about is really good advice for sleep hygiene, for creating the perfect environment to find that sleep, but also not to be too hard on yourself if you find that you've had something, you know, really terrible happen, and you're, you know, waking up in the middle of the night, or you're, you know, you're noticing that you're having intrusive thoughts just before you go to sleep. You know, that might actually be a good time for you to pick up that journal again and start writing out your thoughts. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Kristi.
Well, actually, the first week or two after Bill's suicide, I feared sleep. I feared nighttime, because my brain had not caught up yet with the reality of what had just happened. So when I would go to sleep and I'd wake up in the morning, I would realize this wasn't a dream. This really happened. And then I began to fear going to sleep, because that was an escape. And I dreaded waking up in the morning and facing reality, because for a while there, I was struggling with, no, this really happened. This isn't a dream. This is your life. You're going to have to deal with this. And that's exactly what I did. So I would stress about waking up and having to face the day with my new reality. So then I would pull out my journal and start writing, and that would calm me down.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wow, your journal became like your best friend in a way.
Absolutely. And also, it's important to realize that you are journaling just for you. Mm-hmm. Don't journal because you think somebody else, your mother or your brother or sister, might pick it up, and you don't want to have your darkest, deepest thoughts exposed. journal for you. And also what I realized is that I expected when I went back after a year and read my journal, I expected everything to be pretty linear. You know, I started out not being able to sleep, afraid. People were avoiding me, and then I just expected this smooth line that elevated into this place of happiness. But while reading my journal, it was a roller coaster of emotions. It started out like very sad, and then it was anger. You know, it wasn't stages of grief, it was just a lot of different emotions, but they would repeat. So it was a roller coaster ride. And then eventually it started to level off. And now I'm at a place where I feel very inspired and very hopeful. But don't think that you're losing ground if you have setbacks and those emotions that you're feeling repeat themselves.
Right. Beautiful. And thank you, by the way, for kind of telling me about that period of time right after, and how, you know, it's true that it was a struggle. It doesn't just go away. You don't just put these steps in place and then it's all fine and easy. This is a process that can go back and forth, and to be gentle with yourself, you know, as you navigate that. But now we're going to talk about the next piece, which is exercise. So I'm a total exercise buff. I make that a regular part of my life and my day. And I know for me, you know, I have a lot of balls in the air. I've got a lot of things going on. I'm working with a lot of people. I've got a big practice. I've got a lot of staff. I've got a lot of things going on. And I think if it wasn't for a few of the things that I do, I wake up in the morning and I do a yoga practice. That's a really good way for me to start my day and meditate. And often I then either run or I do some HIIT training, or, you know, some dancing, some wave dancing, or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter. You know, the issue here is not the thing that you do. It's that if you've got a busy life or you want to have a life that's really meaningful, exercise helps to prop you up in every possible way. And it's really good for your emotions. As a matter of fact, in terms of the research, exercise is one of the most important things that you can do. Now, you had a gym before all this happened, and now you're running a Pilates studio. I wonder if you could just tell me about, you know, how would people start when they're maybe just trying to reclaim exercise? Because that, I find, is the heart of things. One thing if you've already got something in place and you love it, really hard to get started if it hasn't been a part of your life.
The first step is to be realistic. How much time do you have to dedicate every day or every other day to an exercise regime? If it's 10 minutes, start with 10 minutes. So start out slow. We psych ourselves out of exercise because we think, oh, I can't go run for an hour. You know, I don't feel like I have that much energy. Don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. Start slow. Start with a 10-minute walk and then increase it, and then eventually do a walk, jog, or just do a hike. Get outside in the sunshine and the fresh air to help you feel better. And also what's really important, don't subject yourself to peer pressure. You know, if your friends invite you to go on a hike and you hate hiking, that's not your thing. Find what works for you. Find what you're passionate about. You can go online on YouTube and get a dance video. You can do everything online, get a yoga program. You don't need to go to a gym or a studio. You can do it at home. But be realistic with your goals. And first and foremost, find activities that you enjoy so you don't set yourself up for failure.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of people who get very excited and think about what they might have been able to do 10 years ago, and they jump right into it. And then they're injured and then they can't do anything for a few months. So it's always good to just take your time. I absolutely agree. And you also recommend embracing nature. And that is one of the most beautiful areas that, when I think about ways in which people can really allow themselves to decompress, and I'm not talking about a 10-minute walk. I mean, really take your time. You tell a beautiful story about Diego, who was working these terribly long days, staring at a screen, working inside, not doing anything outside at all. And, a friend invites him to go. In this case, it was for a hike. And he went for a long hike, and he was immersed in it. And he came home and he was sleeping peacefully, really being okay with inside of himself. And this was in terrible contrast to how he was doing just before, where he was just struggling all the time and not doing well, not managing. And it's like allowing yourself to really actually invest the time to be fully immersed in nature. So can you talk a little bit about, what being outside does for a person?
Well, the goal of all these self-care tools is to change your brain chemistry. And when you're outdoors in the fresh air and the sunlight, and you're making that connection with nature, whether it's a bird, a tree, the grass, the ocean, a mountain, we all have nature around us. It actually ups the serotonin in your brain, which serotonin regulates your mood. So that's why I included that kind of information in each chapter, because I think it's one thing to tell people, get outside in nature, it'll make you feel better. But I think you need to know the science behind it, and that it is actually changing your brain chemistry, lowering your anxiety, and just getting in touch with the world and nature. And all of that helps to transform your life. So the brain chemistry is changed when you practice all of these self-care tools. That's why just doing one is not enough. You need to have a combination of all these tools so that you have a healthy brain, and it's going to improve your mood and your self-esteem.
Now, talking about a healthy brain, you raise a self-care strategy that most books like this overlook, and that's your sugar consumption. And we know that sugar consumption can lead to incredible highs and then crashing emotionally and physically. And you write in your book about, the title is Don't Drink Sugar, and what happens after 1 hour after drinking a can of cola. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because I think this is an overlooked area, and it's one that's so important.
Well, I was always taught, even in college, when you talk about nutrition and diet, it's all about, eat the 4 food groups, eat lots of green leafy vegetables and protein and carbs and fats, and what percentage. But really, when it comes down to it, if you are still consuming tons of sugar, you are not healthy. You are not taking care of yourself. So that's why I focused just on sugar. That's a good place to start. If you can cut back or cut out all that extra sugar, you're going to look and feel better, because the example I give in the book is 1 can of soda has 10 teaspoons of sugar. And then your blood sugar spikes. Your liver responds to this by turning sugar into fat. And so then eventually, after an hour or so, you start to crash. Now you feel terrible, you feel grouchy, you feel edgy. So you have another can of Coke to bring you back up. And sugar is so addictive. I have friends that have 8 or 9 sodas a day, and they are addicted to sugar. So I want people to look at it as an addiction, the wine, the sweets, the sodas. And for some reason, I think our society thinks it's okay to be addicted to sugar, but certainly not drugs or alcohol. And that's not the case. It affects you physically as well. Cavities, it affects your arteries, which can lead to heart disease. So it's really important to really pay attention and read labels and cut back.
So, Kristi, we're just about ready to wrap up, because we've actually been on the line for almost an hour. It has been an absolute delight speaking with you and hearing about your story and your incredible resiliency. One of the things that you also add in the book is building better relationships. And I wonder if we could end on that, because I think for me, that seems to be one of the most important things that people can do. and just your thoughts on that, because I think you've had to really recreate yourself in a way.
Well, the most important relationship, outside of family and friends and a romantic relationship, is the relationship with yourself. You have to think of yourself. How should I be treating myself? Treat yourself the way that your best friend would treat you. So I think the most important thing in relationships is self-love and taking care of yourself first before you can be of value to other people.
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, that's a wonderful thing to realize, that, being friendly with yourself and having that meaningful, true relationship is the start of it all. And then I just want to say, in your book, you have a whole lot of little checking in exercises to practice gratitude, and to work on speaking and thinking positively, to adopt a abundance mindset, create positive rituals, and many things that you encourage people to do and to reflect on. So I will just say the book it's such an easy read. Be You, Only Better. We're talking with Kristi Hugstad today. Any last words, Kristi, that you would like to share before we sign off?
I just want your listeners to know that all of these self-care tools will work wonders for you. And you don't have to start out practicing all of them. Whatever spoke to you during this interview, whatever you thought, what, I am drinking 3 glasses of wine every night, I got to cut that out. Or I'm guilty of drinking, 5 cans of Coke a day. So start out small. Don't overwhelm yourself, and just take it at your own pace.
That's beautiful. Thank you so very much, Kristi. If possible, we'd love to have you back on again when you've got your next series of books out. And for those people who are animal lovers, Kristi's next books are all about, maybe you can remind us of the names of those books, the ones that are coming.
The title is Returning to Joy, and they're a gift book. So it's 4-color, beautiful images. The first book is Inspiration for Grieving the Loss of a Loved One. The second one is Inspiration for Grieving the Loss of Your Dog. And the third one is Inspiration for Grieving the Loss of Your cat. And I had so many people say, hey, you're in grief counseling. What about all of us that are losing our pets? Yeah. And they have such a connection and bond with their pets. So that's what inspired me to write those books.
Oh, thank you so very much, Kristi. It was a delight speaking with you. And for everybody out there, have a gentle day.
Listening to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with your host, psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.